I'm Nicola Talent, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com. As usual, there's a huge amount of planning.
Have this podcast started?
Yeah.
It has, right? As usual. Well, actually, it's a great segue in because you've actually have planned and produced something of note.
Yeah.
As well as taking your career breaks and all that over Christmas. Which
I might look like I'm not concentrating on things, but I am, ultimately.
You're
full.
You're concentrating on a small amount of things, and not concentrating on a large number of them. But you have produced, and I think it sounds brilliant, doesn't it? I suppose it's a 9-part series, which is a lot on Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. Probably one of the most, I think, genuinely one of the most sinister figures to arise in the criminal underworld in the last number of decades. And
so high up in the Kinahan cartel, number 2, you know, and running the UK and Ireland really for the grouping for decades. Of course, the podcast series, the 9-part series, is available for subscribers to crimeworld.com. But we are going to play a little bit of an extract at the end of this chat we're having, just so as everybody can get a little bit of a taste about what it is. And there's 3 episodes up on crimeworld.com today. And there's going to be another 3 put up next Monday. And then the final 3 the following Monday. So it's a really good, robust series, which traces Thomas Bomber Kavanagh from his early days in Drimnagh to his jail cell, actually, in the UK, because that's where he's ultimately ended up. It's funny because you go about putting together, editing and all the rest of it, these series, and you're actually grasping back to work that you've done really over a 20, almost 30-year career. Thomas Bomber Kavanagh would have been on my radar for a long, long time, and I've had quite a few, interesting little run-ins with some of his folk. I have been up close and personal with him. I have been at his home. I have seen the wealth that he has accumulated. I have gazed upon his beautiful mansion in Calador in Mallorca, and I have dug into the details really of the violent nature, the psychopathic nature of him, which really allowed him get to the very, very top. We've actually called the series The Science of Fear because Kavanagh studied the science of fear. And he knew how to threaten people, underlings, how to bring them to a certain level that they were still useful for him, but not to push them over the edge into, I suppose, post-traumatic stress disorder or other things that can make people useless to the boss.
So, I mean, if you think about the people that we've actually heard on tape or on text, because there's loads of conversations from the EncroChat hack about him, and there's some various wiretaps, mostly from the UK. But you get a sense of the people who feared him are these really, really major criminals, and they include people like James Mulvey, people like Liam Byrne, even though he was his brother-in-law, people like Pater Keating. All of these people are recorded describing him as a terrifying figure, and these aren't people who are routinely terrified of anybody. So besides that, he also must have been a very determined and focused person, because he wasn't just one of these terrifying guys. He also had the smarts to go with it.
Oh, definitely. And, he has this modus operandi where he builds structures around himself, cells, with a lot of the time with people who have no criminal background or history and would be unknown. He's done that again and again. He has escaped the law a number of times. He's always managed to, it sounds cliched, but he's always managed to remain one step ahead of the law. When his previous groupings were broken down, were people were arrested, were jailed, got very lengthy sentences. He always slipped the net. And there was never any allegations. Sometimes in gangland, when you have somebody like that, you'll always have these allegations. Oh, they must have been touting. They must have been. There's never been a suggestion. And I don't think anybody necessarily believes that or ever did believe that with Bomber Kavanagh. But of course, what happened when he tried to save his own skin is quite intriguing.
Yeah.
Because it's well, it could be described as that, really, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bizarre plot, I think, is what we've typically called it. Where, of course, he's basically set up a gun seizure to be found by the NCA, the National Crime Agency in the UK, in order to get himself a reduced sentencing time. Of course, this had been done before in the UK successfully, but of course that ended up getting jail time or prison or convictions at least for some of his closest associates. Where does Bomber Kavanagh come from? Where does his story, his criminal story, begin?
Well, he comes from Drimnagh. There is certainly some background of criminality going back generations into some members of his family. His uncle would have been sort of an associate of the General Cahill. He would have grown up with those big names kind of in the ether, especially around that area. He gets into drug dealing very early. Previously, you know, the usual route, armed robbery, very violent, very up against the court system, isn't afraid of police or judge. Threatens witnesses in cases against him and others, involved in drug dealing, one of the first targets of the Criminal Assets Bureau. That's how significant he would have been in 1996. Yet he's not a household name like many of the others.
No, because, I mean, the guys being targeted in 1996 would have been Jerry Hutch, Georgia Penguin Mitchell, John Gilligan. I mean, the really literally household names.
Yeah.
But Bomber Kavanagh was one of the first guys they targeted then, and he would have been at least a decade younger than them at that stage. He would have probably just been his late 20s, I think.
You know, and even that, he was one of the first to be targeted.
Yeah.
Because there was so little known about him. There was very little reported on it.
Yeah.
Very, very little. He ended up handing over a house that he had in Drimnagh to the Criminal Assets Bureau. It was the only asset they had identified that he had at that point. And he moves then with his then and now wife, Joanne Byrne, of course, which cemented that, you know, the merging of those families, the Kavanagh Byrnes, into what would become the Byrne organised crime group, the Kavanagh organised crime group. They sort of mould into one. But he goes to England with Joanne Byrne and he sets up a car business there, which is a front for more drug dealing. He is operating on the absolute top level in the UK and presenting himself as an ordinary businessman. He's hugely violent, as you say. I would think that one of the names, and the only name that you mentioned there, of somebody that I think wasn't afraid of him is Peadar Keating.
Yeah.
Because he stands up to him a bit.
He stands up to him a bit, but he certainly, and I think
he's his boss, but he's not. The rest of them definitely are afraid.
Yeah.
Everybody's afraid of Bomber and what he's capable of. And, you know, as the series will show, he is very fond of weapons. He's very fond of that science of fear that he uses on his underlings. He will dole out beatings himself. And he collects weapons. And there was a cache of stuff found in the bedroom, stuffed under his bed, under his mattress, where he sleeps with his wife. This family man, by the way, he's a really strong family man. But his bedroom is just, I mean, there's slash hooks, there's absolutely everything. It's almost like a fetish.
Yeah. And of course, he left Ireland after the CAB proceedings. And while he certainly hadn't disappeared from the criminal view, from the public view, he kind of moved into being this shadowy figure that would get the odd mention, but nobody really knew where he was or what he was doing. But in that time, from the late 90s up until 2010, he becomes a multimillionaire, a cocaine trafficker, really, doesn't he? One of the most significant in the UK and as well into Ireland.
Yeah, and I mean, as the podcast shows, he's a big spender, Bomber. Really, that is what draws us back to be interested in him, certainly as a media. I think the police have always been and always realised that he was this sort of kingpin who seemed to escape the law. But yeah, his spend, his lavish spend, you're talking dropping 100, 200,000 on a family holiday, driving cars that some people would consider to be the cost of a mortgage, and he's really like, he gets the nickname Santa Claus back in Crumlin, Drimnagh, because every time he comes home to visit the family, he's laden down with gifts, Rolex watches, expensive jewellery, etc. for them. He ultimately, his brother-in-law, as we know, David Byrne, is killed in the Regency Hotel. His business relationship with Daniel Kinahan is kind of cemented in this blood bond at this point. They're both out for vengeance. Daniel Kinahan, because he has escaped, he was the target of that, he has to show who's boss. And Bomber Kavanagh to avenge his brother-in-law, because they are a very, very tight, close unit. And indeed his own standing, because, in that world, if somebody comes for you, you have to go hit back 10 times harder. And hit back they did. And it was really in that feud between the Hutch and Kinahan factions, which was very one-sided, and the Kinahans, it was there where we really get a window into the kind of character Bomber Kavanagh is, the violence that he directs, and that sort of insatiable appetite he has for revenge.
However, it would be his undoing, really, maybe gradually, but ultimately the steps he would take would gradually unravel that criminal empire and see him brought quite low, I think, in court, where the point at which he's arrested, and he has this, I suppose, it's not a heart attack, but it's possibly
a panic attack, is it?
I think it's a panic attack.
Yeah.
And that would be, I suppose, his undoing is his arrogance and his desire for revenge and control.
He's interesting as well, because you see from that panic attack he takes when he realises the penny starts to drop, that this time he's not going to be walking home or letting others carry the can. He is facing a very long sentence in jail, and to try and thwart that, to get a lesser sentence, he then creates this crazy gun plot and brings all sorts of people, associates and relatives, including one of his own sons, into it. They all end up in trouble. He's behind bars at the moment, but he still has a reach out into the community in the UK and here. He has celebrity pals and associates. He is somebody who I believe is undoubtedly looking forward to his release date, which won't come for another probably 10 years anyway. And at that point, he may be released on license. But he has only recently faced a proceeds of crime case, essentially, in the UK, and it's particularly interesting. And when you get to that part of the story, you can see really what makes Bomber tick.
So where can you listen to it? Even though I know, but I have to...
You have to ask that question.
Yes, as if I don't know.
So you can listen to it, all 9 parts, over the next 3 weeks on crimeworld.com, which is where we're going to put a lot of our deep dive journalism, our more intense creations, shall we say. We're going to be here, we're going to remain here on Crime World, but our longer form journalism, our kind of deep dives into individuals like Bomber Kavanagh and like the Dapper Don and others, will be for subscribers only there. It's free content, ad-free listening, which I love myself.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And it's just a click away.
Just a click away.
So we're going to play a little extract now from the series, and anybody who does want to listen to the rest of it, you got to get on and subscribe to crimeworld.com.
Thanks, Nicola.
He didn't look like a gangster. Thomas Bomber Kavanagh looked more like a suburban dad, bespectacled, square-jawed, fond of his designer cardigans. But behind that mild exterior, he was Ireland's answer to Tony Soprano. Brutal, feared, and the UK commander of the Kinahan cartel. Running a multi-million euro empire from an outwardly ordinary mansion in the English Midlands, he rose through the ranks of the Kinahan organised crime group through mercurial violence, family ties and logistical brilliance. But in the end, it wasn't bullets that brought him down. It was wiretaps, encrypted messages, and a gun plot gone wrong. His incarceration and the stripping of his assets last year marked the first major shot across the bow of the Kinahan empire, a house of cards which is beginning to collapse under international pressure. The Kinahan organised crime group reaches out from Ireland and the UK to Dubai with links to deadly cartels in South America. In recent years, law enforcement has suggested that a so-called super cartel involving the Kinahans and several of Europe's other biggest criminal organisations has controlled a third of the European cocaine market. If there was a Sunday Times rich list for criminals, the Kinahans would be near the top.
The Kinahan organised crime group have transcended international boundaries, distributing multi-million pound shipments of cocaine and heroin throughout Ireland, the UK and mainland Europe. They have also been engaged in firearms trafficking and money laundering. It's estimated their illicit empire is worth over $1 billion.
Within the hierarchy of the KOCG, Thomas Kavanagh was viewed as just below Daniel Kinahan and effectively the European CEO of that drug trafficking network. While family texts reveal a devoted family man in regular touch with his children and his wife, police describe him as a volatile mobster with an undercurrent of savagery which terrorised his subordinates. With links to criminal royalty in Ireland, soccer royalty in England and a persona veering somewhere between Tony Soprano and Paulie Walnuts Galtieri, this is the story of how the bomber finally fell.
Thomas Kavanagh was a top-tier criminal. He was somebody at the very highest end of criminality. You know, next to Christy Kinahan and Daniel, he was the individual who carried the most weight. Yeah, he certainly commands respect, and in order to do that, you need to be disciplined, organised, to a degree of loyalty. You need to be ruthless.
The security on the house is unbelievable. The bulletproof glass, the doors, you knock on the front door and it's like knocking on a vault door in a bank. It's that secure.
The arrest and conviction of Thomas Kavanagh is one of the most significant convictions that I've seen, because here is somebody that achieved and managed to rise to the highest level of organised crime with the trappings of wealth and the power that came with that. When the likes of Thomas Kavanagh can be prosecuted and locked up, you know, it proves that nobody is beyond.
You're listening to The Science of Fear, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh and his brutal reign as Daniel Kinahan's right-hand man, a Crime World subscriber exclusive series. This is episode 1, The Making of Ireland's Mafia Godfather. It's July 25th, Ipswich Crown Court. 3 of Ireland's most notorious criminals flicker onto the courtroom screens from prisons across England. Thomas Bomber Kavanagh appears on Zoom from Belmarsh Prison, looking surprisingly tanned and trim in a dark grey t-shirt. Beside him on the screen, his lieutenants Gary Flash Vickery and Daniel Kinahan appear from other prisons, fidgeting in their seats. In contrast, Kavanagh sits bolt upright with arms folded across his chest and listens intently in an interview room with bathroom blue walls. As a female prison guard nips in and out of Kavanagh's interview room, the exasperated judge, Justice Martin Levitt, stops proceedings to scold, "We'll just wait for Belmarsh to stop coming in and out of the room because it's interrupting us yet again." Over the morning, there are various arguments set out by wigged barristers who call each other "my learned friend" in clipped British accents. But the outcome is clear. Kavanagh has 3 months to pay back more than €1.26 million in criminal assets or face another 12 years in prison. One by one, the court strips him of his assets: luxury watches, designer clothes, equity in a Majorcan property, rental income, cash seized by police, and even the cost of a family holiday to Cancun. And the biggest blow, his half share of a fortified Tamworth mansion, the marble-floored stronghold where he reigned like an Italian mob boss in the English Midlands. The court was told his wife, Joanne Byrne, the sister of David Byrne, who was murdered in the Regency, had not responded to a court notice. Kavanagh, sitting at a wooden desk in Belmarsh, betrays no sign of emotion at the prospect of losing the family home. But behind that blank stare is a man who once weaponised fear with precision. Police wiretaps revealed a mobster, almost scientific, in his obsession with torture, casually calculating exactly how much pain he could inflict, terrifying men into loyalty without paralysing them completely. Britain's National Crime Agency finally brought him down, jailing him for 26 years. Now, here in Ipswich Crown Court, they're dismantling what's left of his empire. And then, one final twist. It appears that Bomber couldn't do his time. In a scheme that wouldn't have been out of place in a Guy Ritchie movie, Kavanagh tried to shave some time off his 21-year sentence for drug smuggling by orchestrating a plot from behind bars. Hoping to dupe authorities into handing him a lighter sentence, he tried to lead the National Crime Agency officers to a weapons stash. Instead, he was rumbled and slapped with another 6 years. We spoke to some of the NCA officers who were involved in taking Bomber down, including one who was tasked with following the money. It was a job that took him across international borders.
This particular case, I would say, was complex because we had overseas assets in Ireland and in Spain, Lanzarote, and there was also the inquiries when pulling together the investigation as well, because there was Dutch hauliers involved. There was drugs were coming in, say, from the Netherlands. They were coming in from Spain. So there was quite a lot of international partners we were involved with when we were pulling this together. So the actual value of the drugs, which was agreed on between the prosecution and defence, eventually was 10,470,833, and that was it was 3,750,833 of cannabis and 6,720,000 pounds worth of cocaine. The benefit figure for Thomas, with all the other assets involved, we agreed on just over 12 million of benefit from his criminality. And we started off somewhere around 15, 16 million. So we've come down about 4 million. And the majority of that is the difference in value of the drugs. Knowing the significance of him, it was really great result to get him convicted and now to get the confiscation order against him as well and have that benefit hanging over him.
Officers who went through the rows of designer gear in Bomber's gated mansion were astonished at the sheer scale of luxury goods. The drug proceeds had been splurged on luxury and security in almost equal measure. The place was sealed, reinforced doors, bulletproof glass, and cameras covering every approach. Inside was a display of wealth that would rival that of Imelda Marcos. Money was lavished on Moncler jackets, a shoe collection worthy of a Saudi princess, and a watch collection fit for a Premier League dressing room. The list goes on. 30 pairs of identical Armani jeans, Gucci labels, a collection of handbags that a Kardashian would be proud of. This was how the cartel's profits were laundered, through spending sprees and rolls of cash handed across the shop counters in Harrods. The definition of ill-gotten gains was hanging in wardrobes in his luxury mansion in Tamworth. Cartel members know the risk of peddling drugs across international borders, but when officers start rifling through their six-figure wardrobes, confiscating their luxury watches and handbag collections, it does hit a nerve.
A lot of criminals are quite happy, getting imprisoned for the crime is part of the job. But when you actually say, now we're going to take all your assets, that's when it gets personal, because that's the reason they're committing crime, is for their lifestyle. That's their job. And we are then taking it all away or getting an order to take it away. So that's when it can get quite personal.